welcome back to another episode of the Taiwanology podcast. This is your host, Kwangyin from Taiwan's CommonWealth magazine. Taiwan's democracy is often praised for its high voter turnout, vibrant civil society, and fiercely contested elections. But in 2025, just months after a new president and legislature took office, a different kind of political drama is unfolding. Not at the ballot box, but through a wave of citizen-led efforts to remove sitting lawmakers. It's called the Massrecall movement, or 大罢免. And it's unlike anything Taiwan has seen before. The roots of this campaign can be traced back to mid-2024, when the opposition-led legislature, dominated by the Kuomintang, or KMT, passed a set of controversial reforms expanding its powers. Critics saw these moves as legislative overreach, or even a threat to the balance of power to Taiwan's democracy. In response, grassroots groups, many made up of young voters and first-time activists, began mobilizing to recall dozens of KMT lawmakers. As of mid-June, more than 20 had passed the first legal threshold for recall, with full recall elections expected as early as August. If they are successful, follow-up by-elections could reshape the legislature by the end of this year. This is the first time in Taiwan's democratic history that the recall process is being used at such a scale, which has raised urgent questions. Is this a sign of deepening civic engagement or a breakdown of institutional norms? Are these recalls strengthening Taiwan's democracy or just fueling more political anger? To answer these crucial questions, today we're joined by Nathan Batto. He is the Associate Research Fellow at Academia Sinica and a Joint Research Fellow at the Elections Studies Center at NCCU. Also a proud author of the blog Frozen Garlic, where he's been tracking Taiwan's elections and political evolution since the year 2010. We are going to ask him, what's really driving this recall wave? Are recalls making Taiwan's democracy stronger or just angrier? And what are the broader implications here for Taiwan's domestic politics and, most importantly, geopolitics? Hello, Nathan. Welcome to the studio.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Okay. Could you please introduce yourself and your blog, Frozen Garlic? Why does it have such a really interesting name?
Well, I came to Taiwan for the first time in the summer of 1989.
Okay, 1989.
I'm a Tiananmen refugee.
How did that happen?
I was supposed to go to Beijing for a foreign studies program in the summer, and so we canceled that, and instead we came to Taiwan. So my whole career is a mistake.
Started as a mistake.
I spent most of the 1990s in Taiwan, first as an English teacher, and then I got a master's degree at NCCU in political science. I went back to the United States to get a PhD, and I taught there for a few years. And I came back to Taiwan in late 2009 to take a job at Academia Sinica. And so when I came back, I thought I would start this blog, Frozen Garlic, just to express what I thought about things. It's a fairly casual blog. I write about what I think and what I want to write about. There are lots of things about Taiwanese politics that don't necessarily fit into scholarly articles. And so I write about those kinds of things in this blog. It's just anything about Taiwanese elections or other politics that interest me.
Right. Why are you so fascinated by Taiwanese elections and how do they differ from those in, for example, the US?
Taiwanese elections are more lively. There's more participation, especially when I first started. I went to a lot of rallies, outdoor rallies, and those kinds of things just don't exist in the United States. In the United States, elections are mostly, or they were at the time, they were mostly conducted on TV. Campaigns did a lot of advertising and a lot of TV commercials. Whereas here, I could go to an outdoor rally and experience kind of the atmosphere of elections firsthand.
Right.
And also, what Taiwan used to do is decorate itself in banners. And so every election, Taiwan would dress up in its election holiday clothing, if you will. And that was an atmosphere unlike anything in the United States.
Right. So it's almost like carnival season, so election season. So explain the name frozen garlic for people who don't understand the local Taiwanese language.
In the United States, at your election rallies, when you have them, they chant something like 4 more years, 4 more years. Here in Taiwan, the chant is always, we're going to win.
Right.
动算.
动算, yeah, 动算.
In Taiwanese. The newspapers didn't really know what to do with that in the early 90s. And so they translated it into Chinese characters, not 动算, which is 当选.
Right.
But using the characters frozen and garlic, which sound like 动算.
In Taiwanese.
In Taiwanese.
Right.
And so I thought, well, this will be a name that nobody will have thought of before. And once you think about it, you'll never forget it.
Yeah, that's true. So on every newspaper headline, you will see the words 动算 written. And when I saw the name of your blog, I just thought to myself, wow, this guy is a genius, because this is something that every Taiwanese would recognize. And I hope in the future, very soon, that all Americans would also recognize it and start using it.
It actually showed up in a New York Times headline.
Okay, good. Yeah, so see, you're really a genius. And so we just started talking about elections. So you were saying that election campaign season in Taiwan are almost like carnivals. They're so lively. I don't think people are very familiar with recalls. We've had a few recall elections before, here and there. For example, for Kaohsiung City Mayor, Han Kuo-yu was, he lost that recall election and was removed. And there are a few recall elections for a few lawmakers here and there. But this is really unprecedented that we have this recall. Can you explain to our listeners how a recall election works in Taiwan, just in layman's terms?
Yeah, recalls are not, they're new here too, because recalls before 2016 were very difficult. You could try a recall, but they always failed. In 2016, they changed the law and made recalls much, much easier, much, much more manageable.
Right. Can you explain who changed the law and why did they do that?
Well, it comes out of the Sunflower Movement.
I see. Right.
After the Sunflower Movement, a lot of the young activists tried to recall legislators, and they all failed because the recall law at the time said you had to have 50% turnout and more yes than no. So the 50% turnout is a pretty high threshold.
Right.
The incumbents who were being attacked just stayed home. That meant that the recall had to supply all 50% of eligible voters.
Well, that's really hard.
So turnout in a general election is about 70% usually.
Yeah.
And if you need 50% of the eligible voters, that's an enormously high threshold. And then recalls always fail. The activists from that, after 2016, got into the legislatures, especially the New Power Party, ironically chaired by Kuomintang, pushed for a change to the election and recall law so that you, instead of needing 50% turnout, you need 25% yes and more yes than no, on the theory that if the no side just stays home, 25% would be the equivalent of 50% turnout. And the no side doesn't have to provide any support for to defeat themselves.
I see.
So in 2016, this suddenly became possible.
Much
easier.
There
are 3 stages through the recall process. The first 2 stages about getting petitions.
The signatures.
So in the first stage, to propose a recall, you need 1% of eligible voters in the district. And only district politicians can be recalled. Party list legislators can't be recalled.
I see. Okay.
So most districts have about 200 to 350,000 eligible voters. So 1% is about 2,000 to 3,500 signatures.
Right. 1% sounds pretty easy, right?
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it sounds pretty easy. Yeah.
I think that you could do that.
Yeah.
And they all managed to pass that threshold eventually. Some of them were pretty painful. Some of them were pretty easy. The second stage, you need 10% of eligible voters.
Okay.
So now we're talking about 20,000 or 35,000 at the minimum.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. So that's quite a bit. And then the third stage, you actually vote. And again, as I said, you need 25% of the eligible voters to vote yes.
Yeah, 25.
And then more yes than no. 25% now is a pretty low threshold because, as I said, in a general election, you normally have about 70% turnout. So if you win the general election, you're probably getting about 35% or more of the eligible voters. And in the recall, you only need 25%. So now, if you are a legislator facing a recall, you have to take this seriously. You have to mobilize your side to defend yourself.
To vote no.
To vote no.
Yeah.
Because you can easily lose 25%.
If you don't mobilize your supporters.
Right. So in the past, they would just ignore it. But under the current law, they have to fight back.
Yeah. So which is why already for a month, I have seen on the streets of Taipei, their posters of those legislators who might face a recall election. They already have posters like, please come out to vote no on, and they left the dates blank because we don't already know when the elections are going to be, but they want people to come out and vote no. Right. So it sounds like, as I said in the introduction, there are already over 20 legislators of the KMT party who might face recall elections. And what exactly triggered this current wave of campaigns? And what do you think were the triggers?
Well, I'm going to tell you two stories. One from the green side of the kind of DPP.
DPP, the ruling party. Yeah.
Well, not necessarily from the party, but from the people who generally are on that side.
Okay.
And then one from the KMT, which is much more party centric.
Right.
So from the green side, from people who are sympathetic to that side, what happened was that the KMT and TPP coalition in the legislature massively overreached in the legislature, pushing through a bill to expand legislative power that was ruled unconstitutional. So then they pushed through a bill to cripple the Constitutional Court by requiring 9 sitting justices to rule something unconstitutional. However, of the 15 seats, 7 of them, their terms expired. So now there are only 8 sitting justices.
Oh.
So there are not enough people to make an unconstitutional ruling.
I see.
So basically, the legislature pushed through this expansion of power. It was ruled unconstitutional. Then they crippled the Constitutional Court, so they couldn't do that again.
Okay.
And then they slashed the budget. The budget was slashed by about 7%. But most of the budget is required spending. It's things like salaries or interest payments. The discretionary spending was slashed by something like a third. Just unbelievably high budget cuts.
Right.
And so there was quite a bit of anger, and that included some military programs.
Right.
So there was quite a bit of anger. The other thing was that they did this through unconventional methods. Legislative violence is not new to Taiwan, but it's always been done by the minority party trying to block the majority. In this case, it was the majority coalition that stopped the minority from protesting. They cut off discussions of the proposals. They didn't allow the minority to make arguments that these were lousy packages, lousy ideas, and they didn't defend them themselves. The majority coalition stood up and they blocked the legislature. They voted by raising hands, which is technically legal, but we never do that.
Okay, so this sounds like a bullying behavior.
Well, yeah. So it was technically legal, but bothered a lot of people.
Right.
And so this is what inspired the Bluebird protests.
青鸟运动.
Right. And you had lots of people who thought that this was both the content and the process were deeply troubling. And they started protests, and they started some recall movement for several districts, and they were organizing recalls before the DPP got involved. And so in early January, the DPP floor leader said they decided to co-opt this and said, we're going to have a mass recall. We're not just going to do it in a dozen or two districts. We're going to do it for everyone on the KMT side.
Right.
But in this story, this has been led by the social movements, by the social groups. The DPP got on board late, kind of co-opted it, guided it a little bit, made sure that it happened everywhere, not just in Taipei City and in selected districts, but got it everywhere.
All over Taiwan.
All over Taiwan.
Yeah.
But in this story, this is really something that comes out of anger at the KMT and TPP's actions in the legislature, and society is reacting.
Right. And grassroots, I think that's the first story.
Mobilization.
Right.
Yeah. The other story is the KMT kind of vision of what's happened, which is, come on, this is Taiwan politics. We always fight hard. We always fight. It's not fighting dirty. We always take advantage of all the rules we have. Legislative violence is nothing new. You stood up and blocked the podium before. We did it this time. Of course, we used our advantage to fight a power struggle.
But that's normal, right? That's what you do.
That's what the voters voted us in the office to do. We're doing everything, and this is completely normal politics. So spare us this indignation, spare us this kind of outrage, this fake outrage. We see what you're doing. You're trying to recreate the Sunflower Movement, in which you blocked our legitimate majority from signing the services trade agreement with China. We're trying to recreate that, and we're trying to overturn the results of a legitimate election. So if you can do this recall stuff, so can we. You are going to put together recalls cynically through your party resources. We can do that too. And so the KMT recalls did not feature a lot of social movements. They featured a lot of party workers putting together lists of signatures from lists that they already had on hand. But those are two very different visions of what triggered these recalls.
Yeah, conflicting accounts, some might say.
Yeah, so depends on what triggered the recalls. It depends on your partisan views.
Yeah, depends on which side you're on, I guess. Yeah, and this is really unprecedented. So you're saying you're giving two accounts. So one of them is from the green side. You're saying that it's a civic mobilization. It's from grassroots. People were genuinely outraged by the overreach of the KMT and TPP lawmakers. But the other side is that, this is just political fight, and we are being unfairly portrayed as people who are CCP sympathizers. And I think some of them say that, I guess. And I'm going to quote something you wrote in a post on unfrozen garlic. I think that's really, really interesting. So you wrote that, and I quote, "When this process started, I viewed it mostly as a partisan fight in which social groups played a minor supporting role. But you seem to have changed your mind. What changed your mind about that?"
Yeah, when we started, I thought mostly about the fact that parties are very good at mobilizing voters for things like rallies.
Yeah.
When the party wants to have a rally, they can put together 50,000 people with no problem.
Yeah.
And I thought these signatures will be easy. The main thing will be the vote at the end. And what I've learned is story after story says that the KMT tried to do that through regular party machinery, and it's failed miserably and backfired and caused all kinds of legal problems. Whereas I wouldn't say the DPP, because those social movements don't want to be called DPP tools, or they think of themselves as leading the DPP, and the DPP is kind of following them.
I see. The citizens who try to recall the KMT lawmakers.
Yes. And there are so many stories about how much work you have to put in. It's not like a rally, which just happens on a Saturday and you have one day.
Yeah.
You need a lot of work to get people out to stations on the, the MRT stations or in public places, setting up a stand and collecting signatures. Not just that, though, but you need to go back and make sure that everything is correct.
Yeah.
You need to put them together. So you have to collate them by neighborhood. You have to go back and check again and again and again. There was one story from Hualien where they had thought that they had done something wrong, and they had to go back and check something like 3,000.
I remember that one. Yeah.
And it took them, 2 weeks to do it.
Yeah.
Each one by one. And what I've learned is that this is not like organizing a rally. It's not a one-day commitment. What you need is activists who are willing to basically put their lives on hold and take 2 or 3 or 4 weeks off and devote themselves to this almost full time. And that is a level of commitment that is not something that political parties can just order.
Right. It's pretty backbreaking work, I should say. Then what's interesting is why do you think the KMT side has failed to mobilize its supporters to dedicate as much time or resources as the other side?
Well, they didn't have the initial outrage at the legislative process. But then they also made a mistake in the first round, when they only needed 2,000 or 3,000 signatures, they put those together largely, it seems, through the party workers going through old party lists of people who had signed up for KMT activities.
Other things
they had, the lists that they had on file.
Yeah.
And as it appears that they did this all over. And so a lot of those people had moved. Some of them had died.
Okay.
And it was obvious that some of those signatures were forged because there were too many dead people.
Right, I see.
Sign.
Right.
And at some point, that's illegal. You can't sign somebody else's name. And at some point, it became apparent that getting involved in the KMT petition drives was risking getting involved in legal problems. Okay. So that also depressed their willingness to join in activism. I think that there are plenty of voters who don't like the DPP and would be willing to sign a petition. But I don't think there were enough volunteers who were ready to be activated, who were passionate about that. And the KMT didn't try at first. And by the time they tried, I think it was a little bit dangerous.
Yeah.
To get involved.
It was too late. They started the wrong way, I guess, the lazy way. They thought that would get them what they wanted, but in the end, it
because
backfired.
Remember, they thought this is all cynical. The DPP is doing it. We can do it too. This was never ideological to start with in their vision.
I see. So they probably lack the legitimacy as well because KMT is the majority. And so who are you going to defend? I guess it just didn't have the legitimacy. So, okay, Nathan, we're going to take a quick break now. When we come back, we're going to talk about the implications of the results of the recall for the political situation in Taiwan. Welcome back to the Taiwanology podcast. This is your host, Liu Kwangyin from CommonWealth Magazine. We're joined by Nathan Batto. He is the Associate Research Fellow at Academia Sinica. Today, we're talking about Massrecall, a campaign that's happening right now in Taiwan. So, Nathan, we were just talking about the kind of different energy and vibe between different voter groups. The pro-KMT or the pro-green voters, they are kind of mobilized in different ways and motivated by different things. And what can you observe that could tell us what the voters' expectations of the political system are?
Yeah, this is a really interesting experience. It's the first time we've been through any kind of mass recall, and it might be the last time. But I wrote a book about legislative violence, about brawling in the legislature, and it doesn't really have too much electoral impact because by the time the elections come around, you've already forgotten about that, and it's party versus party. This might be something that we can actually see what people think about violence or uncivil behavior in the legislature because they're voting specifically on
people
on legislators' behavior, and they don't have to vote party versus party for recalls. They can recall somebody and then vote the same party back into power in the by-election, just somebody else who didn't do all that. This might be one of those really good tests that tells us what people really expect of their legislators. And I actually think that very positive result might be to vote out some of the more extreme legislators and vote their party back into power just with a more moderate person from that party. And that might change the behavior of legislators in the future. That's one possible thing that this could tell us about the expectations that people have for legislators.
Well, that's a very interesting point. So you're saying that this is a rare occasion where the individual lawmakers, what they say and what they do are held accountable. So as an individual. So I think that's pretty rare. I mean, maybe even for the first time. That's really interesting. And I think it would be also useful to think about the possible scenarios of the by-elections, because you mentioned a scenario that's also what I have been contemplating. So from the DPP side, we know that they are pretty optimistic. They might be able to recall successfully 6 to 8 lawmakers of the KMT. But then I think what really matters is the by-election, because it is totally possible that after those by-elections, the re-elected, the new lawmakers might still be KMT, right? Or what's the possible scenario? Because that would mean that the DPP still doesn't have the majority. In that case, does it really change the dynamic in the parliament?
Well, people are pulling out numbers. You said 6 to 8. A few months ago, people told me 3 to 5. Nobody knows anything.
True.
We don't know how the recalls are going to play out because we've never had anything like this. And we really don't know how many of them are going to pass the 25% threshold. We don't know how many the KMT legislators are going to mobilize their own supporters. We don't know. In the last election, one of the main factors that allowed the KMT to do so well was that the TPP voted fairly heavily for the KMT. They were mobilized mostly by the presidential race. Well, there is no presidential race this time. They might not show up. We don't know that. But it's not their job to defend the KMT. So we don't really know how many of these recall elections will succeed. And then after that, we don't know about the by-elections either. By-elections are strange. Abnormal things often happen in by-elections. The DPP won legislative seats in Zhongli and Hsinchu places they never win.
Taoyuan and Hsinchu. Yeah. So how can we explain that?
And the KMT nearly won just a couple of years ago. They nearly won a by-election in Tainan District 2, which might be the deepest green district in the whole country. So strange things happen in by-elections because they happen after another election where if one side wins does very well, that side is energetic and can't wait to vote. And the other side is demoralized and doesn't want to think about stuff, doesn't want to think about politics. And so you have very strange results sometimes in by-elections. Right. So when people say very confidently 6 to 8 or 3 to 5 or whatever they say, they don't know. They really don't know what's going to happen.
Right. But then, I think that's a given. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen. But let's say if in the end, after the by-elections, that DPP has happily regained majority in the parliament, do you think that would mean that everything will work out for them and things will be normal again?
Whatever normal is. I think that they would pass their favorite
laws.
agenda and, approve their nominees for the Constitutional Court and the Central Election Commission and the NCC, the National Communications Commission. They would pass their laws. The KMT would be more aggrieved because they would feel that they'd had their legislature stolen away from them, and not without any justification. They would be more likely to try any kind of scorched earth tactics in the legislature. So yeah, it would be normal. Back to regular politics.
Right, regular politics. But then I also have heard some critics saying that, okay, so there are some critics of the recall campaign. They are skeptical of the legitimacy of DPP's argument that unless they have majority, the government cannot function, or it's not functioning. There's so much filibuster and so much conflict. Is there a point? If we are in a democracy, isn't it supposed to be a lot of negotiation, a lot of compromise, and you're always going to have arguments and you try to work with the other side, work with your enemy? Isn't that the point of democracy? Is mass recall really the best way out?
Well, mass recall might be one way out. Parliamentary democracy, a parliamentary system like you have in Japan or in the UK, guarantees a majority in the legislature. And that's the premise of the whole system. That's how it works. Presidential democracy does not. In presidential democracy, you elect the executive and the legislature separately. And if they don't get along, they're supposed to figure out some way to compromise.
Yeah, and that's Taiwan.
Taiwan is not a pure presidential system, but it's more like a presidential system.
Right.
Divided government can work, but it is one of the weaknesses that political scientists point to in presidential democracy, that there is no way out of gridlock. And so you need some kind of compromise and negotiation. And if the sides don't want to compromise and negotiate, then you can't force them to. Presidential democracy often relies on a bit of corruption, a bit of pork barrel politics, a bit of betraying your own party.
Yeah, quid pro quo.
Voting with the other side. And people don't like that when their party does that. So there is a political science argument that would say presidential democracy doesn't work very well with divided politics unless you have politicians who are willing to try to find some compromise. And we didn't see that earlier last year.
Yeah, so I agree with what you say. And I must say that personally, I would like to see more politicians who are willing to sit down and make compromises, like what we have seen in, for example, Germany. They have coalitions, and they sometimes are pretty dysfunctional, but they try to negotiate and compromise. It's a parliamentary system, right? I see. So I guess we could only work with what we have and expect the best.
And are you willing to see compromise in which your side compromises with the other side? Well, that's the difficult part.
That's difficult, but I believe personally, as a civilized citizen, I'm willing to painfully accept that. But I don't have the luxury because we don't have that system. Right, but I think another question that's on a lot of people's minds is, what's the geopolitical implication of the mass recall? Because some people are saying that, so especially the pro-green citizens who are supporting the recall of KMT lawmakers, they're saying that, these blue lawmakers, they are all CCP sympathizers. They work with China, so it will be doing the right thing by recalling all of them. We'll be able to show to the world that we care about Taiwan's integrity and identity and our willingness to, not work with China. So what do you say to that comment?
Well, I'm not really a international relations scholar, and my expertise is not in national security or international politics. For people who think that Taiwan would be sending a message to Beijing, I would answer by looking through my American glasses and saying big countries don't really care what small countries think. Big countries make policy based on what's happening inside the big countries. The United States doesn't care, doesn't make policy about Bolivia or Guatemala based on what's happening in the latest Bolivian or Guatemalan elections. They make policy about that based on what's happening in the United States. So I wouldn't expect Taiwan to be sending a message that China would pay much attention to.
Right.
China will make policy based on what people in China think.
How about a message that we could maybe send to the U.S., like the Americans who are, if they would decide whether to support Taiwan militarily or in other ways, depending on the results of the Massrecall?
Again, I don't think that the United States makes its policy based on what is happening in Taiwan quite so much, maybe a little bit more. But the only thing would be whether whatever emerges from these recalls, whether that government is willing to spend a little bit more money on military. But again, the United States is worried about American geopolitical considerations. And I don't know that this is a critical moment for international relations. I think this is more of a domestic political fight.
Okay.
But again, I'm not an expert in international politics.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nathan, for your time and this immensely interesting discussion. I believe whatever happens, we will have a very interesting, if turbulent, months ahead, where we would see hopefully the results of the recall elections and the by-elections. And whatever happens, this will, I think, go down in the textbooks of political science, I hope, at least in Taiwan, as a very interesting and remarkable case of domestic politics. So thank you, Nathan, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if you enjoy the show, leave us a review or drop us an email. We'd love to hear your thoughts. For deeper insights into the meaning behind Taiwan's Massrecall movement, please visit CommonWealth English website. The next episode will be available July 22nd. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts and stay tuned for more great conversations. Talk to you soon.